Welcome to Whose Turn Is It Anyway, your board game and tabletop podcast where we put you in the heart of our gaming group. In this special expansion pack episode, we catch up with Oliver Kiley, the designer of the upcoming new Pax game, Pax Illuminaten, from Iron Game Design. So let's waste no time and jump into the show and meet Oliver.
We're here with Oliver Kiley, designer of Pax. Thank you for joining us, Oliver. JP's also with me.
Hello.
If you'd like to just tell us a little bit about yourself, Oliver. A couple of things that we like to get out of our guests early on is kind of what their favourite game is outside of the one they've developed. And also kind of how did you get into board gaming?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me here. It's awesome to be on the show. So appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about Pax Illuminaten and everything else design related kind of leading up to this. For me, so I guess one thing to mention, I'm a landscape architect and urban designer and manage a lot of kind of exciting projects in the mobility space. So that's kind of my day job. And then spent, a lot of time over the past many years kind of practicing game design as a hobby. But I guess before we get too much into that, you asked maybe about a favorite game or two. Could rattle off a couple of those.
Yeah.
I think one that was a big sort of watershed moment for me that's really actually inspired a lot of my different games that I've designed over the years, and maybe we'll get into this a little bit later. But Reinhard Knizia's Tigris and Euphrates, just like a major one. It was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Look at what this game can do. And happy to dive into that more. So I think, that's one game that stands out. Another one that's a little bit more of an off the beaten path game too is A Study in Emerald, which I don't know if you all have heard of that or played it.
No,
so,
I've never heard of it.
Writing it down.
Okay, well, so the very short pitch for that game is, and you got to get the first edition specifically. Supposedly there's another revised edition coming out. But this was a Martin Wallace game, and it was based on a Neil Gaiman short story of the same name, which was in turn based on a Sherlock Holmes story, which was, I think, A Study in Pink, right?
Okay.
Except it was crossed with a Cthulhu mythos thing, as Neil Gaiman wrote it. So anyway, it's a wild and weird board game.
As he likes to do, but I do love Neil Gaiman as well, so I'm gonna have to check that out.
Anyway, it's an interesting one. So, I think some of my design sensibilities and the kinds of games I like are, ones that create, a lot of interaction between players, and that really brings players together into kind of a shared space where they're interacting in a shared board environment, that has a lot of spatial elements to it oftentimes, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, you mentioned Tigris and Euphrates. That's one. We love a bit of Reinhard Knizia, don't we, Davey?
Yeah, we do.
We played Babylonia, which is a game that we need to play again. Like, I remember playing that, 3 years ago, when we played like 5 games back to back in an evening, and I loved it.
It's so crunchy for a very simple, easy to pick up game. It's got a very nice like puzzlistic nature, which he's really good at. And obviously, when I was playing Pax, I could obviously see some influence of that, like kind of like puzzle you have to kind of work out and interconnect.
Yeah, nice.
So you were about to say kind of what got you into the industry as well. What were the steps to change from obviously landscape design to doing some board games on the side?
Sure thing. And it's, I guess, the question of how far back are we going? It's funny, Jonathan. You mentioned. Growing up in the 80s, same situation. You mentioned Hero Quest earlier, same situation. I still have it down on the shelf, not the reprint, but the original one from the 80s that managed to hold on to and subjected my kids to various years of that, me taking on the role of Zargon or whoever he was, right?
That was the best bit, being the bad wizard guy. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, so I grew up, I think, playing a lot of games like that, some, mainstream stuff too, but had sort of stumbled into games like Hero Quest, dabbled a little bit with some role-playing games back in the day. I think both of those things lent themselves to some creativity. I'm a kid in the 80s. I'm like, oh, like we went through all the missions in Hero Quest. Like I can design my own missions. And like, so there was that sort of creative energy happening pretty early on, all the way back then. That game was a little bit of a gateway into Games Workshop, because there was a collaborative aspect between Hero Quest and Games Workshop related products back then. So I ended up, actually playing, a lot of middle school and high school was playing, Warhammer 40K and things like that.
Favorite army?
I played a lot of Eldar and a lot of Space Wolves. Nice. Everybody had their
strong,
their Marine army and then their non-Marine army that they played back in the day. It's actually during the pandemic, a friend of mine and I got back into the game playing it over Tabletop Simulator, but we haven't played any of it or kept up with it in 15 or 20 years. So it was like, we'll just pick up where we left off back on like third and fourth edition. We didn't bother getting anything new, but we had a great time with it. So I think there was, those kinds of games always lent themselves to be dabbling in sort of creative side of it and tinkering with rules and tweaking things to kind of make it your own way. And then, later on, I guess when I was in college, undergraduate, met my now wife. Her family played a lot of games as well, kind of growing up. And that sort of like rekindled an interest in like, oh yeah, board games. Like I used to play a lot more of these. So started buying a few games, back then. So this is probably 2002-ish, 2003, something like that. Somewhere in there, played Catan for the first time, started to get hooked into that. One that was maybe a bit presaging what was to come with Pax Illuminaten is that I bought Steve Jackson's Illuminati Deluxe game, which I don't know if either of you have ever played that.
No, I haven't.
It's an interesting one, but very much on the like conspiracy theory side of it. Like, it was set in modern times, and it's about.
Is that the one that's got quite a cartoony?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen it. I've never played it.
Yeah, he made, I think, Steve Jackson Games. I think they made like a collectible card game, Illuminati game at one point. I think that was New World Order, but this was just like a standalone boxed game. Anyway, it was a very, very interesting game, really heavy on kind of negotiation, but it was also had this kind of number crunchy aspect to it that was very much like a product of the 80s and like even like role-playing games that era. The back of the rule book was like a table with like 20 different modifiers plus this and minus that, and a lot of that
spreadsheet
kind of
to the side just to document everything as well. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it was a fun game, and still one that I think back on very fondly, and despite the game not being the most modern thing by today's standards.
Some of them still hold up, even if it's partly nostalgia. It's we like revisiting games we know are just absolutely busted, and we'll still go play them anyway. Game of Thrones is an example for us, but I understand that. Yeah.
We know it's old. We don't care. We know it's janky. It's fine. It's fun.
Yeah, exactly.
We all get annoyed at it at one point during the game, but that's part of the fun of it.
That's part of Thrones. Yeah.
So Pax Illuminaten is not your first game, though, no?
Nope. So somewhere along the lines, I started designing games, and I have a pretty tall pile of prototypes and all kinds of different things. My first game that was published was Hegemonic, and that was published by Minion Games. I want to say 2012. I'm probably wrong, but I think that was the listed publication year. And that was, I mentioned Tigris and Euphrates earlier. It was in hindsight, I'm noticing that it's even more this way, kind of reinterpreting some of the spirit of Tigris and Euphrates into like a 4X style space game. So for listeners that don't know, 4X is the kind of genre of like civilization style games where you're expanding your empire, exploiting resources, exploring things, and exterminating or competing with your opponents and through war or various other channels. And so that Hegemonic was kind of an attempt to port over some of the idea of Tigris and Euphrates a little bit into kind of a different space setting. And I think ultimately that game ended up being probably more abstract in a way in how it played than a lot of than the kind of typical audience for like a big space empire game might be wanting.
It had a lot of unique mechanics for 4x, but the way that they kind of interact with each other is not seen from a 4x, and it was also quite short for a 4x, which is quite nice as well in respective terms.
Yeah, especially some of the ones we play where you're like, right, let's sit down for 8 hours and let's battle it out.
Twilight Imperium or something, or even Eclipse. Well, Eclipse can go pretty quick, but that's still a pretty big bear to
dependent on tech through. Usually with Eclipse, isn't it?
Yeah.
People looking at those tech things for a long time thinking, how am I going to build my ship?
Yeah, that is where the game drags on a little bit, is that tech tray, isn't it? It's like everyone wants to have a little look at the tech tray and no one can memorize what's in that tech tray. But
no. So from Hegemonic, Pax seems to have also taken some evolution from that and developed, but obviously it has its own style. What we were really impressed with when we were playing it is how much of a 4X it kind of felt like, even though it was a card game, and how the mechanics all melded together. And it was a very involved game for such a tiny box. Was that like a design choice?
Definitely. So, a couple interesting things about, I guess, the origin of Pax Illuminaten and how it got there. And I don't know if you caught this and anything else that had been written about the game or not, but the original design of it started basically not too long after I had published Hegemonic. There was a design competition on Board Game Geek, and I think it was to design either an express version of a bigger game or design something that fits inside of a tin that was kind of like an express version. And I thought, what the heck? I just published Hegemonic. Can I make a 4X game out of basically a deck of cards? And at the time, the other thing to point out was I was tinkering around a lot with the Decktet, which I don't know if you've heard of that or not.
No.
So it is a very cool deck of cards all the cards are dual suited. So, and there's 6 different suits in the deck, and it's kind of an slightly asymmetric arrangement of how the suits are all put together. But it works a bit like a traditional deck of cards, right? So there's 2 suits and there's a rank, 2 through 9 on all the cards. Mm-hmm. And the person who designed this thing has a whole book that they've made with, kind of variations of games, taking a lot of traditional card games and twisting them to fit this Decktet format. Anyway, as a designer, it's something that's fun to tinker around with because you're like, I can take this, traditional card game and see if I can get it to work in this game. So I started playing around with, can I use this Decktet to actually recreate sort of a 4X game like Hegemonic, but, obviously a lot more abstract because I'm just using this simple deck of cards. And so it was one of those cases where the design kind of grew out from there. There's parts of that original design and like the basic menu of actions that you can do in Pax Illuminaten, and maybe we can get into that a little bit more. But the basic menu of actions that you can do is largely the same. Like the resource economy in the game with generating favor and everything is kind of largely the same. And it was one of those things where it just sort of fell together as a core kind of gameplay dynamic really quickly. Which was exciting. It's always kind of one of these like eureka moments. You're like, this is really great. The game kind of grew out of there, and I think that was almost 10 years ago at this point that little first kind of iteration of this game came to be, and I just kept kind of coming back to it. I'd be working on other game designs or other projects, and I'd come back to it and tinker with it for a little while and try it out. And eventually it got to the point where I was like, I'd like to actually do something with this. And I kept trying on different themes for it. There was a whole like Mars colonization theme that it was going into, a woodland theme. There was a whole bunch of other things that I kept tinkering with, and nothing really ever kind of gelled with it in a way. Part of me was also at the same time I've been playing a lot of 4X video games, like Civilization style games on the computers, and just getting actually really disillusioned with them because I was like, each one of these is like just a retelling of like a colonization theme over and over and over again. I'm like,
Yep.
Space. Yeah.
I was
Yep.
like, I kind of want to move away from that a little bit. But here I've created this game that, like you said, sort of feels like a 4X game in terms of how it evolves. So I kept thinking, what else can I start to like build this around? Like, what do the dynamics in the game represent, if not sort of 4X? And that eventually led me to just kind of stumbling almost into this Illuminati idea with like secret societies. I was started to go down like a secret agent rabbit hole. Maybe it was a political game where you're trying to send your different like political agents or emissaries to different countries to try to compete with each other for rival influence. And so, almost by chance, I was digging through my game shelf and actually came across the Illuminati, Steve Jackson Illuminati game box. I'm like,
Something
wonder
there. Yeah.
could there be something here? And like, obviously, this is very much like the Illuminati conspiracy theory side of it was, what the Steve Jackson game was all about. I started to look at it from the standpoint of, is there an actual history conversation or a real historical narrative that I can try to hook this into? And obviously, I don't know kind of what games you all have been gravitating towards, but there does seem to be an effort to kind of dig into more historically structured games. I think the whole PAX series is very much emblematic of that.
Two things that kind of drew me into your game, and before when we went to Essen, because there was not a lot of information about it outside of that, was just obviously the PAX name and the fact that the theme, the fact it was about Illuminati and all of that it definitely draws you in.
It's an intriguing concept by itself because it's the Illuminati, and you just think, wonder what that one's about. That sounds cool. And I don't.
There's not a lot of games that have done that theme. Obviously, you mentioned the Steve Jackson one, but there's not a lot.
I think that's what appeals, though, isn't it? Because it's not a saturated theme, and like you say, because you've gone down the historical route with it, and I think that's really good because it might encourage people to read up more about the history of the Illuminati, what they were involved in. Are they bad? Are they good? Are they secret? Will they actually have great intentions and all that kind of stuff? It's just an interesting era of history in general, and definitely think that was an intriguing concept.
Yeah, and I'm definitely not would not say that I'm a historian on the subject or at all anywhere close to being an expert.
It's all right, we're not either.
Sorry, listeners. But the research that I did go through and kind of trying to get a handle on the history of what the group was, it was a very short-lived enterprise, really, only about 25 years, not even really that long.
Wow.
And of course, it led to a whole bunch of conspiracy theories that got kicked around.
What do you mean? They're still about now.
I know. Well,
are they?
Who knows? Yeah. But I thought it was really fascinating because I think when people hear about the Illuminati, they jump to the conspiracy theories or like the secret levers of power that are ruling the world and like this whole thing. And at least what the Bavarian Illuminati was about at the time was almost the exact opposite, right? They were trying to bring enlightenment thinking and enlightenment drive social reforms and things like that to their corner of the Holy Roman Empire, which was, of course, at that time, totally under the authority of the church and the nobility that they empowered, right? So, and it was right, of course, on the eve of, the United States becoming a country and their independence, right on the eve of the French Revolution, that all of these things were starting. So it was kind of interesting to dig into that period of history a little bit more and kind of understanding how these different dots started to connect.
Yeah.
Nice. Cool. I've got a question though on
sure.
And this is probably more for my naivety more than anything. So as we said at the beginning, I've heard of the PAX kind of genre of games. But what makes a PAX game a PAX game? Like what is it that has the PAX badge on it? Because that's something I genuinely don't know the answer.
Yeah, happy to share what I can through my experience. And I should say, I've only played a handful of them. So I've played PAX Renaissance and PAX Premier a number of times. I have PAX Transhumanity on my shelf. Haven't really managed to crack through that one yet. Also lived through some of the other games vicariously through a lot of my geek buddies and things. But my understanding, I think there's a few kind of key things that maybe tie a lot of the games in the series together. One is that they tend to be, these historically structured games where they're trying to, take a specific point in history, dig into that topic, and, create kind of a game structured around some of that historical narrative or historical chronology. I think another kind of key part of them is that they tend to be very player driven, meaning that, over the course of the game, the players are all collaboratively kind of building some things, assets in a shared space or in a shared environment that everybody kind of has an ownership or a stake in. So control of stuff that's sitting on the map isn't like exclusively yours to control and own.
Mm-hmm.
You might have joint ownerships and things. And so when you start playing with, 3 or 4 players, it gets really interesting and dynamic because, you're might be doing something that's helping out 1 or 2 other people. And there's a level of kind of mutualism that kind of comes through some of the play. I think there's some kind of hallmarks mechanically for a lot of the games in the series. Most of them all have a market of some kind. So there's, that row of face-up cards, and there's different ways that you can draw cards out of that. So I think a lot of them try to minimize the amount of kind of risk, or not risk, but somewhat minimize, the kind of randomness and luck of the draw side of things, and give players a little bit more agency and sort of figuring out like, okay, here's all the options. Everybody has access to these options right now. Like, which one am I going to go for? Or how am I going to kind of construct my strategy around that? And I think another part of it too is most other PAX games, and this is where Pax Illuminaten is a little different. In addition to having that big shared space that you're sort of interacting through, you're also building up your own little tableau of cards. It's usually not a huge number of cards, and so you're very judicious and strategic about what you're putting in your tableau. And those all have some synergies or connections between each other. And those are sort of the assets that you control more directly as a player, and you're using those to kind of affect this map that has a lot of shared elements in it. And through, I think through all of that too, many of the PAX games have lots and lots of cards that are all unique. Pax Illuminaten is definitely a little bit more on the streamlined end there. And so there's just a lot of variability and kind of potential volatility too, I would say, that can come out of the games. Like, you can have some games that just literally fly by really quickly because a certain combination of cards that came in was, really strong, or let somebody quickly get towards a goal. And other games have a very different feel and different pacing to them. So there's a lot of variability in that way, just in terms of how it shakes out. So anyway, I don't know if that helps.
Usually,
yeah, it does.
Yeah, from what I've read, there's always usually a lot of player interaction, be that through like politics or like some kind of control, or it does seem to have a high interaction though within them.
It's kind of like it's putting you as the player into the kind of eyes and ears of somebody of historical significance playing that role, that kind of part in history, even though obviously it's abstracted out into a game, but but it kind of just draws you into the moment, draws you into the theme, doesn't it? And that's kind of what listening to you speak, it's what I'm kind of getting from that. So yeah, that sounds really great. Thanks for that. I've always wondered. I thought I need to ask someone. So
yeah,
there's an opportunity there.
So now we kind of know what a PAX game like kind of entails. Do you want to give us kind of a basic rundown of Pax Illuminaten and kind of how it plays, and we've played it as well, and we can kind of discuss from there.
Yeah, and please feel free to cut me off as I'm going through any of this and
No, it's
interject
fine.
with a question, so I'm not monologuing too much here.
Go for it.
So, the basic premise of the game is that, for, again, just coming out of the historical note here, the idea for why the Illuminati was formed was that basically in Bavaria at the time, they weren't allowed to talk about Enlightenment text and share any of that. So in a certain way, I like to joke, it was almost like the Illuminati started as a book club. And like you're one of the founding members of the book club that are like getting together to talk about all of these nefarious texts that aren't supposed to be discussed and shared. And so in game terms, what that means is that you are one of the Areopagus, which is one of the founding members of the Illuminati. Adam Weishaupt was a professor at the University of Ingolstadt who started it. And so the goal of the game is that as one of the founding members, you're all going out trying to recruit additional members into the Illuminati. They're referred to as luminaries in the game. So most of the game is based around using this deck of cards that features a historical figure on it. And these cards are all arranged onto a map on the board. And I like to think about it again, like from a conspiracy theory angle. Like this map is sort of like your network, right? You could almost imagine it having little red string lines connecting everything.
Yeah.
It's it's like a social network or a social map, essentially, of connections. And so the goal of the game is you're trying to go out and spread your influence onto these different luminary cards in a particular way in order to achieve 2 of the 3 available plot cards. And so these plot cards are intended to represent, different kind of ambitions that Adam Weishaupt has for growing the Illuminati. Like, hey, we've got to get, a bunch of magistrates together or a bunch of highly influential people together to be able to kind of corner the market and maybe influence policy across the region. So let's get these people recruited. And so if you're able to be the person to have influence over those people as you're bringing them into the organization, that helps. It's kind of the goal to be able to elevate yourself and kind of stay, number 2 in terms of your rank within the Illuminati. So that's kind of the general idea.
Yeah. So mechanically, it's basically you have kind of like have a deck of cards, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then you're playing them for multiple things. Do you want to go over some of that?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So how it'll work, like I mentioned, there's this map of cards that gets put out on the board, and that map does kind of scale in size based on the number of players that are in the game. And then you each have a hand of cards. Hand limit's pretty small at 4 cards. And the basic structure is that during your turn, you can take kind of 2 different main actions, and there's a list of different actions that are available to you. These do all track kind of basically back to the 4X style of thing that we were talking about. So at the beginning of the game, the cards in this map are all face down. And so one of the actions is you can actually go and kind of explore a card. It's called Scout in the game. You can draw a card next to your start position and then put one from your hand back on the map face up, right? And so now you have this Illuminati figure there. And, you're trying to put cards into the map in a particular arrangement to meet some of the plot cards that you're working towards. And I should mention that 2 of the plot cards are publicly available. So everybody's kind of competing for those. But then everybody also has their own hidden plot that they're working towards too. So there's always a little bit of a kind of a calculation you have to make on what
this had like a little puzzly feel on top of the kind of the 4X actions you had with the card mechanics, which I'm sure you'll go into in a sec. But actually trying to get that plot down, it was a puzzle in essence, and that was quite unique.
Yeah, it's trying to get the shapes of the lodges is what you call it, right? And say, I need that kind of connection in that area, and then something over there, and then obviously you'll go and contest with other players because they're trying to do their own thing, and it's that tussle between everybody trying to get their plots off, and it's just it's fun.
Yeah, and sometimes 2 people are kind of working together a little bit on one. We can both, we're we're next to each other, and we can both be going here, but but you got your secret one that you can kind of be plotting around. So there's an action, that scout action for kind of revealing new cards and adding new cards to the map. There's a influence action that lets you actually expend your influence, or expand your influence out onto new cards that have been revealed. There's an action called extort that lets you generate the game's resource, which is favor, which you can generate off of cards where you have influence. And this was an area too, just to kind of dig into the kind of backstory. That was a kind of drove me towards trying to do this like secret agent, secret society, like influence based game design, because I was trying to think like, what is a thing where if you have influence over it, you can use your influence to kind of get leverage and to generate more of the same kind of thing that you might have used to get leverage over it in the first place. Like it was kind of a weird mental kind of mind twister trying to think about like what that logic was. And it kind of got me to this idea of like favor being, just kind of handshake agreements and, hey, like you're my buddy, like let's work together on this. Like I'll help you out now. Maybe you help me out in the future.
Yeah. You're like the political whip.
Yeah.
But it fits though, doesn't it? It fits the thing.
Yeah.
Like perfectly.
Yeah, exactly. So so that was anyway, so there's that action that lets you generate favor. There's another action that lets you kind of redeploy some of your influence around onto other cards, kind of making network connections. There's one that actually lets you basically kick somebody out of the Illuminati and move somebody else into their seat. So that was the expel action, which can be really powerful late in the game to kind of switch things around, either pull the rug out from somebody or slide it under your own feet. And then there's an action called oust that basically lets you challenge one of your fellow kind of rival Areopagus members for influence and kind of push their influence off of a particular card so that you can step in and have influence over that one. So those are kind of the core actions in the game, and you only have 2 actions that you can take a turn. And I think, in my experience and feeling, where the real kind of interest of the game is and where it starts to come alive is with what's called the scheme action.
100%.
Yeah, and so this is where you how it's set up is all of the cards have a action at the bottom of them that you can do as part of a scheme, which basically means you're going to play the card face down in front of you and get whatever that benefit is. Sometimes it's a passive benefit that'll affect any of your other actions that you take that turn. Sometimes it's a bonus action of a particular type, usually with a little added benefit to how it works. But the real power of it is that you can chain multiple cards together as long as they share at least one faction suit as you kind of move along the scheme. So kind of combining that with this card market of being able to decide what cards you want to draw, you can kind of be building your hand up or setting yourself up for a really powerful turn where you're going to do your 2 main actions, but you may end up taking the equivalent of another 2 or 3 actions over the course of your turn on top of that, just depending upon how you scheme things together. So anyway.
It had a lot to think about with the scout action. You're not only are you thinking about kind of, oh well, I want this color going over here. You're also thinking about, oh, what's on this card action wise, like for the scheme action. You're then also thinking, oh well, so I had a card I think that allowed me to swap a card with another card. I was like, well, I could place this one down, and that's going to screw over my neighbor because they're now not going to be able to build into that. I can build into this. It takes their lodge away. For such a small game and card game, it had so much depth and like it's complexity, but it wasn't hard to pick up. It's definitely seemed to have
it's the crunch.
It had that's it. It had a lot of crunch for such a small box. It was crazy.
It's one of them. That's the bit I took away from the demo. And let's face it, we've only played a demo of the game rather than a kind of full blown game. But I love games that has multi-purpose cards anyway. Like the fact that you've got a hand of cards and you're trying to sequence. How do I play this? Do I play this onto the board, or am I playing that for the scheme? And the fact that you have that chain mechanic is just fun. because you just want to go, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to link it to this, and I'm going to do this,
or do I need to extort it because I need these resources?
Yeah,
or,
but when you play the scheme as well, that's the other thing. It's not the fact you can play the scheme; it's when you play it. Do you play it at the beginning before your actions? Do you play it in between? Do you play it at the certain time? So even just on your turn, there's a lot of decision space in essentially the 4 cards that you have in your hand, which is brilliant. It's just there's so much going on for what you probably would expect by just looking at a picture of some cards on the table face down. And there's just a lot of crunch in there.
I keep mentioning it because I saw the size of it, and part of me went, it seems strange for a PAX game to be kind of that size, and I know they're not massive boxes anyway, but I was thinking, maybe it's not going to be as involved as I thought it was going to be, and then I played it and I thought, no, it's actually somehow more involved. I don't know how you've done this, but it was crazy, and I kept thinking about it as well afterwards, and it was definitely a brain burner. We didn't even get to finish the game, but I'm kind of left wanting more.
That's what you want, isn't it? That's what you want from a game. Is it's got you. And you're like, can we not stay? But like, Robin, can we not have another hour and a half? And it's like, no, I need to demo this to other people, guys.
And it's interesting too. Like my group that I've been playing it with a lot over the last couple of years. I mean, we all know the rules by heart, obviously, and so we can sit down, and it's amazing actually how quick sometimes we even play through it too. And I mentioned that earlier on the. A lot of other PAX games, there's a little bit of this volatility where things can swing really quickly and a game might end early, or in other cases, it may get into a weird sort of pattern where it actually lasts kind of a long time, which I like that because you never quite know what you're going to get. It's not always a perfectly even experience. There's a little bit of roughness to that, which, as a designer, I really appreciate. And I think, I appreciate that Ion Games kind of recognizes that as well, and they're like, we know that there's going to have to be some rough edges on this for this game to be kind of what it is and to offer these really varied experiences. I'll share one anecdote. This is a month or so ago. I played just a 2-player game, and I think my friend won on the 3rd turn, and we tried to calculate the odds of like what he had to, like, the card combination that came together to do it. It was something with the Rosicrucian event card, coupled with just what he happened to have in his hand, and then he played a card that let him draw like 2 more cards from the deck, and he got 2 more things, and it was this just absolutely insane combination of cards, like a 1 in a million chance of things working out.
Would never happen again.
Probably never happen again. But it was one of those things where there could be some folks might approach that like, well, like that was kind of broken. Maybe we should design that so that it can't happen, or like design it out. And we kind of stood back and we're like, that was amazing. That was incredible. Yeah. Like, I'll never forget that game. So
it makes it kind of an event in itself. And I know you just mentioned event cards, but it's kind of an event game, which is what you get with a lot more of like 4Xs and stuff like that, because you sometimes do get that in a 4X. Sometimes someone gets this combination, or they get this card, and it happens in Twilight Imperium, stuff like that, and you think, oh well, that's kind of over, but it's fun and it has that event side to it. But I understand that.
I think it's the time though, like you say, this Pax Illuminaten isn't an 8-hour game. It's a fairly quick playthrough. So the fact that those kind of scenarios can happen, it's like you say, oh well, well done, let's go again.
Yeah,
and there's not many games that you can, especially 4X games where you've played them for 3 hours and go, right, oh well, let's go again. It's like, no, I need to go to bed. I really need to go to bed right now. But I loved it, but let's do it tomorrow, maybe next week.
Yeah. So you mentioned event cards in PAX, and I don't think we've actually mentioned what those are, along with, we keep saying lodges, but I don't think we've actually explained those either. Would you like to explain those for us as well?
Yeah, so the idea in the game is when you have basically a block of cards that are all adjacent that share at least one faction in common, once you have 3 cards that are in this kind of arrangement, that forms a lodge. And so in historical terms, how the Illuminati membership actually did a lot of their recruitment was through the Freemason lodges at the time. And so the lodge is a term for basically, a group of people that were in a particular branch of Freemasonry in a particular region or in a particular city.
Mm-hmm.
And so this idea in the game is, there's lots of things that are connected to lodges. So a lot of the goal cards or the plot cards are tied to being able to control, having control of a certain lodge that's in a particular location on the board or is in some particular arrangement. There's also each of the 6 different factions in the game also has a faction card that if you control the biggest lodge associated with that faction, you can claim that faction card, which again kind of gives you a passive ability and like an extra kind of activated ability each turn. So those can be pretty important to play in strategy. So that's the lodge piece of it, this kind of interconnected nature of the cards. And then the other element in the game, there's a pretty slim deck of event cards that gets set up in a particular way. And there's 2 kinds of event cards. There's either a standard kind of special event that's like a one-off thing. And then there's also these edict events. And so the edicts act a little bit as the game timer. And so again, from a historical standpoint, what had started to happen, as word spread across Bavaria that, this Illuminati group was forming and were trying to influence policy and influence nobility and all of this stuff. The elector, which is basically the ruler of this particular, of a province within the Holy Roman Empire, the elector in Bavaria started issuing this sequentially more severe set of edicts, basically outlining participation in secret societies, which is ironic because he was a Freemason member himself, and which is technically a secret society. But anyway, double standards, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the idea then as kind of a game timer is, after the 5th edict gets resolved, that would essentially correspond to like the final kind of edict that basically got all the way up to like punishable by death if you're found out to be in one of these groups, and that sort of forced the membership to kind of dissolve and really curtailed all the Illuminati's official movements at the time. So that kind of acts as a timer. And in game terms, what that means is when an edict comes out in play, the edict sucks up all of the favor of a particular faction that's listed on the edict card and locks most of it down on that card. And each turn, when it comes back to the player who played that edict, some of that favor will go back into the pool and be available for others. But it really sort of ties down a particular faction for a while, which is, I think, fun. And one of the other elements that ties to is that the favor pool is limited. So you only have, in say, a 2-player game, there's 6 of each kind of favor, 8 in a 3-player, or 10. 6, 8, 10 in a 4-player game. And so if you're ever in a position where, one player has this huge pile of favor and somebody else generates a bunch of it, you'll actually steal the favor kind of from your colleague or from your rival, which again is kind of adds a layer to be thinking about. And, the edicts can definitely, slam some people more than others. So you got to kind of watch out for those, which I like.
It means you don't want to be stockpiling resources as well. You don't want to be trying to kind of hold up the game in that sense, because then someone could pull out an edict and then there it all goes. Yeah, it's all your favor gone. Yeah.
Yeah, I spent turns stockpiling this stuff, and now I've got nothing to show for it. Right.
That happened in our demo, right? Because we had an edict that was pulled with the white favors, the clerics,
clergy. Yeah,
clergy.
Yep.
Clergy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the clergy resources came off one of the people that was demoing with us, and he had, I don't know, 4 or 5, and they just went bye.
Yeah,
it was just little moments
it was
like
good
that.
Fun.
It was fun moments.
Yeah, there's a lot of interaction as well, which is really good.
And I'll just say, as my kind of nod back, way back to the Tigris and Euphrates side of things, and that also ties into the other PAX games, but that idea of sort of co-ownership or co-mingling of empires or influence or whatever it is that the game is modeling. So, depending on the rank of luminary card that you're trying to influence on the map, you could have 1 or 2 or 3 players with influence on a particular card, depending on the rank of that card. And so I like that idea, right, of, nothing is necessarily exclusively yours, although some cards may be. But anyway.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I like that, and the fact that you then, when someone else can, if someone exploits and you're on there, you get some resources as well. So you can kind of start piggybacking onto their empire or onto their influenced members. Yeah, it was.
Fuel your own strategies. Yeah, it's all good.
You can kind of see a bit of parts of your previous game, Hegemonic. Is there any other influences that you kind of took from? Obviously, the theme was from Steve Jackson, but is there anything that kind of helped you develop these mechanics? Because they are quite unique within the space that they're being played.
Yeah, I think certainly, just a nod back to the Decktet games too, that sort of, formed the basis of this card deck. So, I mentioned earlier how the Decktet was this deck with, all the cards have two factions generally on them, which is the same as in Pax Illuminati. Most of the Luminary cards, have two factions on them. And, there was one game in particular that if you ever get a Decktet, definitely worth looking up. It's called Magnate or Magnate. I don't know, depending on how you want to pronounce that. Kind of a battle line, Lost Cities type of game a little bit. But there's some resource generation that happens in that. And the way that worked, that was a game I was playing a lot with my wife at the time when I started putting the bones of this Pax Illuminaten game together, 10 years or so ago. So there was definitely that influence as kind of like an abstract game. Speaking of abstract games, I do really, enjoy a lot of the kind of newer era abstracts, if you will. I don't know if you've played or heard of the game called Tuluva before. No. Just kind of like a tile laying game, a little bit like Carcassonne, except you're actually stacking tiles up on top of themselves too. And these were games where there's just pretty simple menu or matrix of choices that you can take on your turn as you go, but you end up building out something that's got a lot of layers to it, on the board that you're all sort of interacting in. So
yeah,
I think those are a couple of the maybe other areas of influence that are kind of feeding into just kinds of games I like, and then by extension the kinds of games that I've been designing.
Nice.
Yeah, because the mechanic of chaining the cards off down to the color of the factions. So yeah, you have to like lead off, and obviously you've got the wild ones, which I think were aces or and then
the aces,
yeah, and then you can lead this chain off. It's strange because it's the mechanic that the Witcher recently used for a lot of their combo for their for their playing of cards. But obviously this is something that you developed a while back. I didn't know whether you'd got influence off of the Witcher for that, then bringing that forward, but obviously not.
Nope, and I have not played the Witcher game at all. So no. That's interesting. I'm not sure entirely where that idea came from. I used to play, Magic the Gathering way back in the day. Now it's doesn't quite have the same combo chaining.
No,
thing. But yeah,
I couldn't remember it from any other game, and then Witcher obviously had done it, and I thought, it's just it's a similar mechanic to that. It works a lot differently. Witcher, you're just doing it to just do flat damage. In this, you're doing it so you can do a lot of combos, stop, do your other actions, and then maybe chain it off again. But it works really well. It works within that environment as well, because sometimes you're thinking, do I keep? I really want to put this card down and scout this card into my influence, but it's got a nice ability on it. Do I keep it in my hand for next go, or do I play it into my scheme? So
there's some other fun levels that come up with it too, because we didn't mention that when you do the oust or the kind of challenges between players for influence, I don't know if those came up in your demo. What ends up basically happening is if I want to try to kick you off of a card, we both figure out, kind of where the engagement's happening, tally up our respective influence that's adjacent to that card. Then we each pick a card from our hand, put them down on the table, and flip them over at the same time. And there's that power number that's on the cards too. So that's like you were talking earlier about the kind of multi faceted nature of the cards. Well, you can play it for scheme. You might be playing it to the map for your plot. You're also looking at it for its kind of strength in resolving these
maybe
challenges.
You keep it for your defense. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're thinking, they're going to try and oust me soon. I need this one for my defense. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. So many dimensions to it, isn't there? So yeah, love that.
It's kind of game where, say we were all going away somewhere and I want to take a game with me to play. It's the game I'd pick up because it's not a travel game, but it's the game that's going to just be able to come with me. It doesn't take long to set up, put it on the table, and you've got so much depth there. You've got the crunchiness to it, and it plays quite quickly. So it seems to tick all the boxes for me.
Yeah, I mean, ironically, we've just come back from Essen, and it's the game that you'd put in your luggage to Essen. Because you want something crunchy. You want something that's it's really going to like tick the boxes. And the fact that the box is small and is, like you say, is a deck of cards with some tokens in, and it's really rich in play and rich in rule set and enjoyment. It's just like, fancy a game? Absolutely, let's go.
Be some good stories that will come out of it as well. I can see.
I've really been, as I've been in the hobby longer and longer, my insidious realization is that, I've limited myself to a certain amount of shelf space. So I can get more games by buying smaller ones. So in part, this is a selfish reason for why I wanted to keep the game box small. But I'm right there with you. I mean, I really like it when you can find a game that's got something in a small box that packs a lot of punch. And even for much lighter games, I'm always amazed by the games that are coming out that are in a small package, very simple rule set, and they're just a blast to play. You can throw in your bag or your pocket and go to the pub or wherever.
It's great to see. It's great to see that kind of designers and publishers are kind of not shying away from the smaller box and thinking that's a negative, because I think in the industry so much we see is it's big box games, heavy games, get the deluxe edition, which takes up a whole Kallax cube, and you're like, seriously, how many of these can I have in my home before I start to say that the shelf space is a commodity in its own right?
And then setup time sometimes is you can't take them
anywhere either. You can't take, I love Voidfall, right, which is a new one that's come out from Mind Clash Games. Love it, absolutely love it. Will I take that somewhere away on a trip? No. Because it's huge.
And setup can be a bit of a nightmare. It's worth it, but it's one of those where you're like, oh, got to set this up, and it can be a bit of a turn off sometimes. Whereas, Pax Illuminaten was just like, there's yours. There we go, done. Here we go. Off we go.
He skipped away from that demo, Oliver. I'm not going to lie. He's like, that was great. As he skipped away from the table the whole.
Yeah.
Like,
I tried. It was so busy, I couldn't really didn't have much room. But
Oh, nice.
That's true. So how do people get a hold of it then? What's the people are interested in this? Think, this sounds up my street. How do we get a copy?
Yeah, so game is not fully produced and released yet. It is going live on Kickstarter. I believe October 24th is the start date. And I think it's going to be a fairly brisk campaign. It'll be running for a couple of weeks.
Well, I think by the time this episode is released and people are listening to it, I think the Kickstarter will be live.
Yeah.
So the best thing to say is we'll have the Kickstarter page in our show notes. Go and check it out.
And if people want to get an early sense or have play it at all on their own, Ion put together a great official Pax Illuminaten tabletop simulator mod too. If you're using that at all, it's all fully scripted for the setup and everything else. I know they're getting kind of an official draft of the rules formatted too. That'll have examples and all the other kind of stuff. We're putting together some tutorial videos that'll be rolled out alongside the campaign too, so people can get a little bit more of a hands-on sense for how it plays and some of the nuances of it. So yeah, it's exciting that it's moving forward. Everybody who's been working on it with me over at Ion has just been awesome to work with.
Great.
So it's really exciting. Everybody seems to be pretty enthusiastic about it. So
I know it's all the hard work, though, isn't it? That you as a kind of a games designer have been putting in, and like you said, this idea has been kind of flying around for 10 years.
Yeah.
So to get to this position where, you know, by the time this episode's released, it's launched its crowdfunding campaign, and then you're kind of sat waiting, going, oh, what's going to happen? And it's quite nervous, but also very exciting, and to finally have that product that you can kind of see. The artwork is probably, you know, largely there or thereabouts, and I'm sure there might be some, you know, tweaks here or tweaks there, as there always are with games kind of at this stage. But yeah, like I kind of get a little jealous, going, oh, wish I could do something like that. Put something to that, but I just play them, man. I just play the games.
Yeah. Well, it starts anywhere. You know, there's a lot of resources if you want to jump into the design world. I don't know. It does become a hobby in and of itself, though, almost separate from the playing of games. So
this is where Davey gets very interested, because Davey, his mind. I know you've got some little design ideas.
I've got two game designs sitting in the back burner that I've sat there since, because I did games design as an open university course. In like my midlife, and then kind of realized that the hard coding side of it wasn't for me, and then I've kind of slowly converted some of them into board games, but I've not actually gotten any further with it other than the theory and some mechanics. I know I need to. And talking to people such as yourself, Oliver, it's always reignites a passion here. So I do like seeing how the games are formulated and how they've come together. And obviously, there's no like a true original idea when you kind of like start putting together all the previous mechanics that you've learned and put them together and formulate them into this in its own idea. And it's just so interesting, and thank you very much for like giving us your time and talking to us about Pax.
Absolutely.
Illuminatum. So there's a couple of there's a couple of like niche number ones, we call them, which is something we do towards kind of the end of the podcast.
This is like the lightning speed dating round, right? Of like
well, kind of, basically, there'll be if you don't like the one I'll give you, you can always choose another. But what's the favorite game that you don't own? What's your favorite game you don't own? Is there a game that you play with your friends that you always think, I really like this? Yeah, I should own that. But it's just one either too big, you're not going to put it anywhere, or it just for some reason it's never made it to your shelf.
I'll throw out a strangely throwback one, because I've never actually owned Catan.
Okay.
And I literally just played it last night at a friend's house. Never owned it, and I never really got oversaturated on it in my board game journey, so I still enjoy playing that one, and that was kind of funny, because just thinking about it, I was like, oh, that's a great game. We were having some beers, we were trading, we were trash talking each other the whole time. It hits a lot of buttons that I think is fun, but I don't own it.
There's a reason they've made so many versions of it, isn't there?
It's still around today, and there's good reason. It is a great game. I think I'm the same. I don't think I'm saturated on Catan as well, because I think I've played it 3 times in my life. So there's plenty of mileage left, I think, in that game.
For sure.
Yeah. And it's one I'm never mind when people get out. It's like, oh yeah, I forgot that this is actually a good game, because the market, there's so many games now, having the time to play them all. And then when you get some of the classics out, it's actually, a little bit nostalgic and good feeling about it. You're like, oh yeah, there's a reason this is a classic.
Do you want me to do the next one, Davey?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. Okay, so what's your favorite game, Oliver, that everyone else hates?
Oh man, that everybody else hates.
Or maybe not everyone, but there's that game where
there's a lot of eye rolling involved, and I'm like, oh God, I remember this one. We're gonna get this one out.
Really.
Well, strangely, actually, probably Peter Jackson's Illuminati game. Go back to that one. Although I think, if push came to shove, people wouldn't complain about it too much. It's been a long time since we played that one, probably 7 or 8 years. But because that game can drag on stupefyingly long amount of time, like well past its expiration date. But anyway, it's kind of holds a special place in my heart. So that's one that comes to mind.
There we go. So our last one is the favorite game to lure non-gamers into the hobby. What game can you get out and then people who aren't necessarily gamers don't go, what is that? What we when you start reading the rule book, people can start switching off.
Yeah, I'm really in. I don't know if there's going to be necessarily one, but I can rattle off a couple. One game that jumps immediately to mind is Scout. I don't know if you've played.
Oh yeah,
that one.
Great game. Games.
Great game.
Yep, and there's that one. There's also Llama or Don't Llama, another Reinhard Knizia game. That was a Spiel des Jahres runner-up maybe a couple years ago. Again, like really small card games. There's nothing like dramatically odd or strange about their mechanics. So they're things that are pretty quick and easy to explain. But again, there's like a level of maybe depth that's hidden in some of the gameplay that makes you scratch your head and kind of gives you pause and say, oh, maybe I hadn't quite thought about that this way. Mm-hmm. We've also just, through experience have ended up recommending Wingspan to a lot of people. My wife and I we've probably played 500 games of that. Just the two of us. It's kind of insane. We've gone through actually 2 whole scorebook sheets. And in each scorebook sheet we use like for 3 games or however it works. I don't know.
Yeah.
Which is, I think that's a game that, and others lately that have been going into that trend towards just themes that aren't sort of the typical themes from the years gone by in the board game industry. I think that's sort of started to open up a bigger range of games to different audiences that might be willing to put up with the complexity of the game because it's got this theme that's coming at them from a different place or that's hitting some different heartstrings. So
Ark Nova is a big one.
Yeah,
it's actually quite a deep and complex game in some aspects, but because it's got zoos on the front. Gamer? Yeah, but no, I'm saying it's one of those that basically because of the theme of the zoo, a lot of people who wouldn't normally play that game will play that game.
Yeah, you're right.
So I do understand that.
Touches the heartstrings because it's like an elephant. I played an elephant.
Yeah, I'll put an elephant into my zoo. Oh, yeah, exactly.
But underneath it, it's like, oh my god, there's a lot going on in here. That's because we love it. But I'm glad you mentioned Scout. Scout's a cracking little game, and I always find when you're trying to play games with non-gamers or people who are kind of maybe outside of the tabletop hobby sphere, that sometimes you end up playing a game and it's not rich enough, and you just think, do you know what I mean? Like it doesn't satisfy the itch. But you play the games with your family, and as long as you're having fun, it doesn't matter. But Scout is one that I find it has a lot of depth for what it's doing. And I think when it clicked with me, and obviously because you have that hand of cards that you can't really change, and you kind of have to sequence the plays in order to smush the cards together to make the hands work. That alone is just fantastic. Everyone digs that. Everyone digs that.
Yeah, that kind of tension ratchets up, right? Like you're trying to eliminate cards, and like, is somebody going to go out before I can pull this thing off? Like you get that whole little kind of arc of tension coming through. But,
yeah, we had a game at Essen on our first night. That was the game that we literally just traveled. We drove.
I couldn't believe this. I could not believe this. I was winning up until this point.
And Adrian played a 7-card kind of flop, didn't he? He had a 7-card.
It wasn't even that deep into the round either, was it? And then that was my downfall from then. I just couldn't do anything. I was just minus points.
Oh boy!
It's like minus 12 points or something. I was like, what?
Bye then.
Yeah.
But yeah, we do love that game. It's good fun.
Yeah, it's always a game I'm happy to play as well. Nice little filler game, or just crack it out whenever, really. So,
Yep.
Yeah, bringing us to pretty much the last question of our podcast is what games and events are you looking forward to or coming up? So, are there any new games coming out that you're really looking forward to?
I have to say my wish list these days is growing smaller, it seems, every year. But
Is that as the space gets smaller on the shelf?
Yes,
Time.
somewhat. And
Yeah.
I think I'm at a point too where I literally have a lifetime worth of games on my shelf. And so I think looking ahead and thinking about games, what I probably look forward to the most is just like having a chance to replay stuff that I like and enjoy more, which is always a bit kind of paradoxical to say as a designer, right? Because I'm like now producing like more stuff that I would want people to buy. So there's a little bit of that guilt there. I am looking forward to Pax Illuminaten coming out, hoping to make it to Essen myself again next year. I haven't been before, so I'm jealous.
Okay, nice.
All made the trek over there, so I'm hoping to get that worked out for, fingers crossed, a launch in advance of Essen next year. So I think that'd be a great chance, and just to make some more connections, meet more people, play games. It's always fun going to conventions and just
if
kind
you
of
end up
immersing
going and
yourself.
we're there.
Awesome.
Yeah, exactly. We'll definitely try and get some games in together.
Yeah, absolutely. You can teach us how to be good at the game.
Yeah, there's some things to learn. There's some subtlety there. So I feel bad whenever I play because I have to kind of rein myself in to not like crush the people I'm testing and demoing with at times.
But sometimes
that's okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes
like, okay, this one's for me. All right.
I need this. I've had a hard day at work. I just need to crush someone. Nice. Nice.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. This was great to have a chance to talk about it and hear a little bit about your interest in the game and beyond as well. So thank you.
I said likewise. We love talking to designers and just getting that passion and just getting that peek behind the curtain and trying to understand how these games come to be, where the ideas seed from, where the mechanics come from, and like I say, we have demoed Pax Illuminaten, and it was definitely one of our highlights of Spiel. And we can't wait to see kind of how your campaign goes and how product comes out into the market, and I'm sure I think Davey's already in line to grab a copy of this into the group, so we'll have
I've got the date penciled in, so I'll be one of your first backers.
Awesome. Well, that'll be the game that your friend owns that you really like that you don't own, right?
Absolutely. So but no, it's been brilliant to speak to you. Thank you for your time.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Oliver.
Thank you very much for listening to our expansion pack episode. It's great to be able to get some time with some designers and get a peek behind that curtain. If you really enjoyed the show, then all we ask is that you share this episode with one of your gaming group so we can make sure we can get the podcast out there. But if you want to get in touch with us, you can find out all the details in our show notes. We can get a hold of us via our email and social media accounts, and you'll hear back from me and the rest of the team on our next episode. So see you then.